On June 1942, inside a command room in Tokyo, Japanese officers studied the maps of the Pacific as if the ocean itself could be reduced to lines, counters, and numbers. The coming operation was supposed to prove that Japan could dictate the war's next move. But during the planning exercises, something went wrong. The simulated American carriers survived an attack that should have destroyed them. The result was unacceptable. The exercise was adjusted. The carriers were removed. The war game continued toward the victory Japan expected. Months later, reality would remember that decision. The operation was the Japanese attack on Midway, planned for June 1942 under Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto. On the charts, the plan looked devastating. American forces would be drawn into a carefully prepared trap. Midway Island would be seized, and the remaining U.S. carriers would be destroyed. But inside Japan's war games, unfavorable outcomes repeatedly appeared. American carriers survived attacks they were expected to lose, and Japanese ships suffered losses that threatened the entire operation. Instead of treating those results as warnings, some outcomes were effectively altered or dismissed. The exercise moved forward as though the dangerous possibilities had never existed. But the real Pacific was not a controlled map. On June 4, 1942, hundreds of miles northwest of Midway Atoll, Japanese carrier decks were already alive with aircraft, fuel, bombs, and hurried crews. Admiral Chuichi Nagumo's 4 carriers, Akagi, Kaga, Soryu, and Hiryu, had launched their first strike against Midway. Then reports began arriving that American forces were nearby. Suddenly, the carefully timed Japanese plan was facing the one thing the war games could never control: uncertainty. And somewhere beneath the smoke and confusion, the American carriers were already preparing to strike. By late morning, the Japanese carriers were caught in a dangerous cycle of rearming and changing orders. Aircraft returning from Midway needed to land, while intelligence reports demanded preparation for an anti-ship strike. On the flight decks, bombs and torpedoes were being moved as crews worked against the clock. Then, around 10:22 a.m., American dive bombers from USS Enterprise and USS Yorktown appeared above the Japanese fleet. The attack came at the moment the carriers were most vulnerable. Within minutes, Akagi, Kaga, and Soryu were burning. The outcome the war games had tried to erase had arrived with terrifying speed. Hiryu survived long enough to launch a counterattack, and for several hours, Japan still had a chance to change the outcome. Its aircraft struck USS Yorktown, damaging the American carrier and forcing its crew into a desperate fight to keep her afloat. But the balance had already shifted. Later that afternoon, American aircraft found Hiryu and attacked again. By the end of June 4th, all 4 Japanese fleet carriers committed to the battle were lost. Hundreds of highly trained airmen were dead, and the Japanese fleet had suffered a defeat that could not be corrected by changing numbers on a map. The significance of Midway went far beyond 4 burning carriers. Japan had entered the battle expecting its carefully constructed plan to work, but intelligence, timing, American code-breaking, and the brutal unpredictability of combat had exposed its weaknesses. The war games had offered warning signs, yet inconvenient outcomes had been treated as problems to be corrected rather than possibilities to be understood. In the end, the Pacific was not governed by the DC, the maps, or the confidence of commanders. It was governed by reality. And reality had just delivered Japan a result its war games had tried to prevent. The war games had been designed to reveal how Japan could win. Instead, the real Battle of Midway revealed the danger of designing a war game to produce the victory you already believed in. The loss of Akagi, Kaga, Soryu, and Hiryu cost Japan 4 of its most valuable fleet carriers and thousands of experienced personnel. From that moment, Japanese strategy faced a harsher reality. The initiative in the Pacific was beginning to slip away. The maps could be redrawn, the calculations repeated, and the dice rolled again. But the ships and men already lost could never return.